Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a good Monday morning. And this is the first of my series on how God seeks to engage our senses in our worship and our liturgy. And I wanted to start with the first sense of seeing. What do we see? And how does God engage that sense in bringing us towards the divine? And the first thing that we see when we walk into the church is very important. And that's why I'm doing the first video from the back of the church when we first enter into the main part of the nave of the church. And there are two things that we see that I wanted to point out to you. And the first thing is just the immensity of what we see when we first walk into the church, particularly the high ceiling. Why do churches have high ceilings? Because most other buildings have low ceilings and they're smaller. They can be big rooms but lower ceilings. And that's mainly because it's easier to heat and cool stuff like that, which means there's a difficulty with that in our church. But the ceilings are high so that our eyes are raised to heaven. Our seeing what we see is supposed to raise up to heaven and see the immensity of whatever is going on here. In fact, we're supposed to feel small compared to the grandness of who God is. And that's why it's so important that churches have high ceilings and be like these massive kind of churches as well. If you've ever been to Europe and seen the huge cathedrals and basilicas there, they're massive. And we feel very small and minute in those things. It's because we're supposed to be humble before the Lord. Humble ourselves before the Lord in the grandness of who He is. And it's not a negative thing. God's not showing I'm this much power and you're not. It's to show the proper perspective of where we're at in relation to God. And we're supposed to see how immense the divine is. How us, humble as human beings, come into the church and seek to embrace the divine. We're trying to embrace it. And in a lot of ways, God is embracing us. So the immensity of the church is meant to embrace us in what we see. So that's why the church, and I'm glad our church has this kind of architecture, it's high ceilings. It's this huge open space above us because it's meant to be that way. We're supposed to see ourselves as humble before the divine. Now, there's something else I want to point out too, and I'll have to move the camera for this so that you can see that, but I want to look at the stained glass windows in our church, and I love our stained glass windows. And they're so much bigger. They're so grand over here too. Why do churches have stained glass windows in them? What's the purpose of that? Because you can't quite see through them, can you? You can see through them, but you can't. And it doesn't quite let light in either, completely. It's kind of, the light changes. And that's actually the theology of the stained glass window. Because when we look out into the world, a world that's fallen, a world that has evil in it, though it has good in it too, because it is part of God's creation, what we do is when we look into the world, our faith is supposed to define what we see. And that's what I like about our saints and Jesus being here too. How do we see the world through the eyes of the saints? How do we see the world through the eyes of Christ, through Mary, and all the other saints that are up here? How does seeing the world with our faith change how we see the world? That's the purpose of stained glass windows in a church. It's supposed to change how we see the world. And vice versa too. So the light shines into the church, but it passes through the stained glass. And the images of the stained glass, the images of our faith in the stained glass windows, change how the light of the church, how the light of the world comes into the church. So our faith defines what we see outside in the world, and our faith changes how the world looks into the church, how the light comes into the church. And it's a beautiful thing too. And there are so many other things in a church too that is based on what we see. Churches are supposed to be beautiful because God is beautiful. Churches are supposed to be elegant. And there's a reason why a lot of churches are even ornate too. It's because that's all supposed to depict the beauty of God, to help us raise our minds from here on earth to the things of heaven. That's one of the definitions of the beauty of why churches are beautiful, is to raise the beauty of the church raises us to the beauty of who God is. So as you can see, there are many things in the church that we see that really are meant to help us engage the divine by lifting our minds up to it. The high ceilings raise our minds to it. The stained glass changes how we see the world. And even just simply the art and the ornateness of even the candlesticks and stuff are supposed to show the beauty of what the church is. That's how we're supposed to see it. So, how is God calling you to see the church right now? How's God trying to lift up your mind to the divine and what you see in the world? And how are we letting the things of our faith interpret what we actually see?